Let me start by saying that mental health is a serious matter and it's an incredibly hard topic to talk about. With that being said, I'll be limiting some of the details shared about today's guest. Dealing with mental health issues is hard enough, but the added layer of money can make it nearly impossible. In today's episode, Lisa, an attorney and mom of two, and I will be having a real conversation about money and mental health. Lisa has received multiple mental health diagnoses that have impacted her financial well-being, and outside of her identity, there's nothing she won't share if it means helping others who are listening. Welcome to the City Girl Savings Podcast. I'm Raya Reeves, founder and finance coach of City Girl Savings. I turned my life around with budgeting many years ago, and now I'm on a mission to help others do the same. I fully believe that you can enjoy your life on a budget, and this weekly show will focus on the intersection of money and the city girl lifestyle. Join me every week along with some special guests as I share my experiences, advice, and guidance on navigating life and money as an experience-loving millennial. Lisa, thank you for being here and braving through this conversation. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, whatever you're comfortable sharing with us?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here because this is such an important topic. Just a little bit about me. I'm in my late 40s. I have two kids who are 10 and 13. And as you mentioned, I'm an attorney. I'm not currently practicing, but I work within the court system. And about my background, I have struggled with mental health issues pretty much my entire life, unfortunately for me. So I almost don't know what it's like without them. And it's definitely affected my finances. And that's something we'll get into more details about. So excited to talk about it.
Yeah. Can you share what you've been diagnosed with if you're comfortable?
Sure. So I have been diagnosed with complex PTSD, which is PTSD from not just a single incident like a car crash, for example, but from ongoing trauma for many years. Additionally, bipolar 2, which is the less severe form, but it's where there are periods of intense depression and then also periods of hypomania, which is not as extreme as mania, but I describe it as feeling too good. It's not a pleasant feeling at all, in my opinion, or at least in my experience. Additionally, ADHD, which I wasn't diagnosed with until I was in my 40s. And then lastly, anxiety, generalized anxiety. One note on ADHD that might be of interest to our listeners or to your listeners is I was not diagnosed until, like I said, my mid to late 40s. And a lot of women aren't because our symptoms aren't recognized because we tend to be the good girls, the studious girls, and not so much the troublemakers. But one thing that since I've been diagnosed, I have learned is that hormones from perimenopause can exacerbate ADHD. And in fact, in my experience, hormones from perimenopause exacerbated pretty much everything. So I want to make a mention of that in case suddenly any of your listeners find themselves experiencing these symptoms. It really, being that age and having those hormones can really shake up your mental health.
Definitely. And I have a friend in her 30s who was recently diagnosed with ADHD. And it's almost like there's a stigma around, well, it's really commonly identified in children. And if you don't have it as a child, you probably won't have it. And it sounds like that's not the case.
Well, I think also, like anything else, it can fluctuate. And in retrospect, I can see things. For example, I vividly remember my fourth grade teacher saying that she couldn't get me to do any of my schoolwork unless there was a reward of doing an art project afterwards. And that's kind of a hallmark of ADHD, that if you don't want to do it, it's incredibly hard to do. Busy work in school, for example, if you couldn't be bothered with that. Not that that necessarily means you have or had ADHD, but it's definitely a sign in conjunction with other issues.
Now, I'm curious. You mentioned that you struggled with mental health basically your whole life. How did it make you feel to learn about these diagnoses? Like, did you feel some sort of clarity, or did it make you feel better or worse? How was that for you?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It was a positive and a negative experience. And I think labels, which diagnoses are tricky because on the one hand, they can be used, as you said, you used the word stigma, they can be used to stigmatize. On the other hand, they can be really positive in the sense that when you know what you're dealing with, it's easier to actually deal with it. I know that's true for bipolar. I'll give that as an example, and having the right medication, because being on a high level of antidepressants can worsen the hypomania, for example. So you don't want to do that. And you need to be on the right medications. And same thing with ADHD. I always felt growing up, I was kind of seen as smart but lazy in school. And as an adult, having issues with time blindness. I mean, you just literally can't follow time to save your life. So being late to work or late on deadlines or, other ADHD symptoms would cause me so many problems in every job I've ever had and get me pigeonholed as a slacker. And now that I know, no, this is ADHD, I've been able to get accommodations for it. I haven't told my supervisor because I don't think they need to know. But there's a disability point person in my employer's HR office. And so I've been able to speak with them. And when things have come up, there was one day, this was an ADHD thing, and I only did part of a time-sensitive project. And I thought I did the rest of it. I completely spaced, and it was pointed out to me the next morning that I didn't. And so I actually got a doctor's note explaining that, and I didn't give it to my supervisor. I gave it to the HR office, and it's a CYA thing, so to speak, cover your ass. So I think knowing what you're dealing with is so, so important to be able to protect yourself in the workplace. Also to be able to just take some of the pressure off yourself. Like, no, this is happening because of the way my brain is working. And this is just more challenging for me than it is for other people.
One thing that I find is common in the City Girl Savings community is women are afraid to look at their situation in terms of finances. Do you think the same holds true for looking at what could potentially be happening from a mental health perspective? Do you think people are afraid to open that door and learn what's going on?
I think a big part of it is lack of awareness or feeling like, for example, depression right now during the pandemic. I mean, I think everybody's mental health is affected to some degree, whether it's just stress or if maybe grief from a loss. We've all been through a collective trauma with the pandemic. But I think a lot of us sometimes minimize what's going on with us. For example, with depression, saying, well, it's the pandemic and I don't have it so bad. My friend lost a parent, or I have a good job. My money situation is secure. I don't have anything to complain about. And so, for example, someone might not get treatment they need because it's so easy to dismiss what's happening with us, or lack of awareness with ADHD, for example. What finally made me realize is even though I'm, quote, high achieving, I do have it. I had to work twice as hard to achieve what I have because of the way my brain works and it not being as easy. But reading an article on time blindness and realizing that's me, that's been me my whole life. And that's when I looked up the other symptoms and it was just check, 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 check. Okay, all of this is me. I want to get an evaluation. And sure enough, the doctor, when I spoke with him, was immediately like, yeah, you fit right into an ADHD diagnosis. So, I mean, for myself, I had a lack of awareness about it. And it was seeing something that was so pronounced a challenge for me and recognizing it. And like I said, I've been in trouble at work so many times throughout my career because of what turned out to be ADHD symptoms. And I felt so bad and had so much shame around that. And I think shame is another barrier to getting help. The last thing I'll say on this particular topic is that vicious circle, I guess, chicken and egg, I'm not quite sure how to describe it, but situation that prevents people from getting help is a lot of mental disorders. They do things to us like tell us we don't deserve better, or we're not good enough, or that we don't have it as bad as other people, some of those other things I had mentioned. And those are huge barriers to getting treatment.
Oh, wow. And I have no doubt that somebody listening to this may be wondering if they should go see someone and maybe they've been holding themselves back. So let this serve as a reminder not to.
And on that note, I'd like to say, trust your gut. If you feel like something's wrong, then it's pretty likely something is, and it's worth asking. And in general, if your insurance covers it, psychiatrists are better equipped than primary care doctors to assess those things. So it's worth, if you're able to see a psychiatrist rather than a primary care doctor.
Let's transition to money and mental health.
Yes.
For you, I would like to understand, how was your money situation maybe before your diagnoses? And did you see any type of drastic change after?
Yes. As I mentioned, I've suffered with one form or another of mental health issues really my whole life, since childhood. But I think for me, I was not taught to manage money growing up. So that put me at a double disadvantage, which was not having an education in it. And of course, they don't really teach it in schools, which is unfortunate. But not having that foundation and having the extra challenges of depression in particular, which I struggled with from, my teens and my 20s were marked by just extended periods of depression and mental illness. And that's the time in life when most of us are really getting a handle on our money and figuring out, how do I save? Do I need to save for retirement? How do I budget? All of those things that are so, so important. And so I never really had that foundation. And Rhea, you and I worked together a couple of years ago, and that was the best money education I ever received. So worth it. And I mean, I'm not trying to plug you as much as just be completely honest about my experience with you. And although that being said, I've struggled with the budgeting, partly because, like I was saying earlier, there's motivation and it's kind of like, this is tedious, it's hard to do. So the upkeep with it, even though I have the knowledge, definitely mental health issues, particularly ADHD, also episodes of depression, hypomania. You can't budget when you're dealing with that. Or if you can, it's very hard. Or after you go through an intense episode of something, be in this situation where it's like, oh, crap, my budget's a mess. And I've also noticed my credit score has been so up and down. It's gone between about 615 and 815 in the last few years. And wow. I noticed that the dips and the peaks in my credit score really kind of track with episodes of mental illness, because I've missed bills. I've had things go into collections. I have missed credit card payments, which is what really hit your credit score hard, or with hypomania. And I mean, I think anxiety sometimes does this too, where I might go on a spending spree. And then all of a sudden, as they say, it's all fun and games until someone gets hurt. And my budget and my bank account get hurt. I don't even, I got so sidetracked. I don't even remember exactly, but that's some of how my mental health has interacted with my finances. I hope that's relatable to listeners. And then it's so easy afterwards to beat yourself up and say, oh, I shouldn't have done that. But I think one key, because I'm experiencing it right now, where I'm just having trouble stopping some spending that I'm doing, some of which I feel good about and some I don't. But I think the key is to have a plan in place so that if you know this about yourself, that you'll go through these periods of spending sprees. Well, when I feel that this is happening and I realize that I'm mindlessly spending, what can I do? For example, can I lock my credit card? Can I block a website on my phone or on my computer? Can I return things that maybe I shouldn't have bought? Whatever it is, have a plan in place, because you could do damage control.
Yeah, I think that's such an important thing to state. You're not done, right? It's not, okay, I just spent all this money and there's nowhere to go. No, it's okay. How can I either prevent this from happening again or put myself in a position where the damage isn't as bad as it was this time around?
Yes. Exactly. Depending what your income is, you could even set aside a little spending spree budget. If it's affordable, there's no reason not to. You know what I mean? As long as you're balancing it out with your other financial obligations, just like you might have a travel budget or spending spree budget. Maybe you have 100, 200, whatever in there that it's like, okay, if I get into this place and I just need to blow some money and do some retail therapy, well, here it is. I've got 200.
Yes, I think that is a good practice just across the board, right? We're human, mental health aside, just in general, nobody is perfect. We can't always expect to stick to a strict regimen. So setting yourself up for success basically means including the things you love in your budget. I've said it before. I will say it 100 times over. It is truly an important aspect of success with your money.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And also, I think an aspect of success with your money is knowing yourself and knowing your spending patterns. Are you thrifty? Are you a spendthrift? And if you are, just like we were saying, budget it in. That's okay.
Yes.
And I think saying, for example, if you're a spendthrift, okay, I know this about myself. So how can I work with it instead of against it?
Yeah, I completely agree. Does the holiday season sneak up on you and your bank account every year? Do you vow to avoid overspending during the holidays but never follow through? Good news, the Frugal Fall Savings Challenge is back for its 6th year in a row. If you always seem to use credit or tap into your no-touch savings for the holidays, then maybe you just need to plan ahead this year. The time to start saving and budgeting for the holidays is now. In this 8-week savings challenge, we'll be saving different amounts each week with a goal of $500 saved right before Black Friday. Be better with your holiday shopping budget and join the free challenge today. Save your spot at citygirlsavings.com/frugal and get ready because we start soon. Now, we're keeping your identity mostly private because you're not publicly out, and I say out in quotations, with your diagnoses. As a working professional, what is it like maintaining the work and professionalism with your diagnoses? How is that for you?
I will say 2 things. One, I was self-employed for a long time because I had young kids and I needed more flexibility than a regular employment situation could offer me. Not knowing I had ADHD, it was very hard. I had a solo law practice where I did essentially government contract work. And so I was getting below market pay and I had no help. I couldn't afford any help, no secretarial help, no paralegal help. I mean, once in a while, I would hire someone to help me for a few hours, if I got in a major crunch or something. But I actually realized at a certain point that I had to leave that job. Well, let me just back up and say in the legal profession in particular, and this may be true in some other licensed professions, that there are continuing education requirements. There are some having to do with mental health, substance abuse, that kind of thing. And because substance abuse, which is a mental health issue as well, is also rampant, in some incredibly stressful fields, such as legal field. But anyway, I read an article that talked about competency to practice in the sense that it discussed the effects of mental health issues on legal practice. And as I was reading it and seeing some of the ways in which I was struggling to meet deadlines, for example, and I probably had a reputation in the courts where I practiced for asking for way too many extensions of time, and just seeing, okay, my professional competency is really being impacted by this. And I want to do the best thing possible for my clients. And that's not always possible with the struggles that I'm having. And so for a couple of reasons, partially because doing that type of work, I just wasn't making the money I needed to make. And because I felt like I can't grow my career in this area and as a solo practitioner and maintain the kind of competency that my profession requires. And what this article I read talked about, it's a real eye-opener. What I ended up doing is working for the courts in a regular full-time job, steady pay, all of that, and having the support of an HR department, and in particular, having one person in HR who specializes in disability has been probably the best thing that could have happened to my career. Because this person, they know me, they know what my issues are, they keep everything confidential. I've had to take, and this is something I encourage people to do if it's financially feasible, which it isn't always. I've had to take medical leave. In fact, last year, due to pressures from work and stress from the pandemic, I ended up taking 9 weeks of medical leave. And it was the best thing I could have done for my mental and physical health. And then again, getting accommodations. Those are the things that I have done. Again, the whole knowing yourself and working your budget around it, knowing yourself and working your career around it, and being in a job now where there's a lot less pressure and a lot less, not a lower standard of professionalism, but there are fewer requirements. And so it's easier for me to meet the requirements.
I want to ask a follow-up question to your story. And, I know you read an article and you kind of saw the signs and recognized that your professional competency wasn't where you wanted it to be to continue doing the solo work. Mm-hmm. How long did it take you to make that decision and actually take action on it?
Oh, gosh. I don't know the answer to that. I'm thinking maybe a year, because a big part of it is being able to find the right job to transition to, because you don't want to go from one job to something where you're having the same pressure or the same high level of requirements on you, because, it doesn't make any difference. It just prolongs the situation. So I was very fortunate. I had this one day where I thought, I'm going to check on the court website and see what positions are available. And there was this one that I read the description and I thought, oh my gosh, the pressure on this job is so much lower than what I have right now. This is doable. My experience meets the requirements, and I applied for it. And skill-wise, it was such a perfect fit. A week later, I had an interview. Week after seeing that, and then I got hired, and I've been there ever since. I'm at 5 years now.
Wow. It's almost like it was meant to be, like it worked out exactly how it needed to.
Well, yeah. And it was funny because that day I was in an episode of depression and feeling like, what am I going to do? I felt trapped. I felt helpless. And I just happened to have this inspiration to check. And there was that job.
Oh, yeah. That was meant to be, Lisa. So another thing that you said was that you shared everything with your HR rep. And, it sounds like you're very glad that you did that. Were you afraid or ashamed or embarrassed to have that conversation? Or did you just tell yourself, no, this needs to happen? Let me make it clear.
Yeah. The conversation itself was fairly abstract. What was more specific was the paperwork that they received. So, for example, the first time I took advantage of it, I might have even been less than a year into the job, and I had this just horrendous episode of depression. And I remember being in a meeting, and in this particular type of meeting, I normally would participate a lot and had a lot to say. And anyway, I'm sitting there and I couldn't even understand what they're saying. It actually made no sense to me. And all I could think to myself was, I really shouldn't be here right now. And after the meeting, I didn't participate at all. I just kind of sat there, and I contacted HR, went upstairs, immediately had a conversation with them and said, how do I do this? How can I take a break? Because I'm having mental health issues and I need to step back for a few weeks. And I think I took 3 weeks off at the time. And I'm so glad I recognized it. It might have been nice if I'd recognized it a little bit earlier so I didn't have so much to recover from. But then once I did that, I immediately contacted my doctor, said, please do this paperwork. They were 100% on board with me taking time off, and it all worked out. So I've never actually explicitly discussed my diagnoses, but they see the paperwork, they know. And hopefully, especially people who specialize in disability, have discretion, compassion. I know mine does. And ideally, anyone in that position would, because that's what the position requires. So yes, it was very hard being able to say I need to take time off. I will say one thing I did with my supervisor, who can sometimes lack in compassion. Instead of telling him I need to take time off, I said, my doctor says, because my doctor had agreed at that point, my doctor says I need to take time off. So framing it that way helped a lot, because then it didn't seem like I was copping out or, anything like that. And then I think he even said, oh, got to do what the doctor says. I was just like, okay, I'm glad I framed it that way.
But
So
you shouldn't
that's
even
definitely
have
helpful.
to.
No, you
right?
shouldn't have to. For me, it made me more comfortable being able to say that. There's no weakness, there's no shame in struggling with mental health issues. However, that's how I felt because I thought, oh, I got into this job hoping that I wouldn't struggle like this. But you know what? Another reason I got into the job was to have robust HR type benefits and the things you don't have when you work for yourself.
Right.
The benefits are there. The accommodations are legally required up to a point. And so if your employer offers it and you need it, take it. Last year, I initially took 3 weeks off. 3 weeks were in, I was still on my couch around the clock, non-functional. In fact, my kids were doing distance learning because of the pandemic. And I sent them to my parents' house for 5 weeks because I'm divorced and I couldn't take care of them. And their father had some major deadline at work. So between the two of us, we decided it was best for them to just be with their grandparents and for me to focus on my health. I think that's incredibly important to be able to do that.
I agree. And I know a lot of companies do offer employee assistance programs, especially, after the pandemic. But my company, I worked for a major bank out of college. And when my dad died, they had an employee assistance program that basically allowed me to have 6 free therapy sessions.
Mm-hmm.
And they were totally life-changing. Grief was what took me there, but actually being in therapy just opened up so many more doors about myself and having that understanding, that awareness, that intentionality of knowing who I am, what my triggers are, what bothers me, what doesn't. And therapy is game changing, in my opinion. I will always promote and support that. And I'm curious to hear from you. What are some ways people like me, people who advocate for therapy and supporting mental health, what can I do or people like me do to continue to advocate and support?
That's a good question. Now, are you talking about advocating and supporting for other people?
So maybe even people who struggle with mental health, letting people know that it's okay to struggle with mental health, to not be ashamed or to have that door open to have the conversation so that somebody can get the help they need if that's what they need.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to have compassion because there is no help without compassion. And I think the biggest thing people can do is understand that, for example, someone who might look like a screw up or a slacker or whatever you want to call them, maybe there's a reason for it because we just don't know what's going on. Like you said, you had this awful tragedy of losing your dad. And you don't know, maybe somebody's going through something like that. Maybe somebody is suffering with an undiagnosed mental disorder. Maybe somebody, as in my case, has ADHD and can come across as screwing up in ways that they're so struggling so hard. And I know for me, I feel like I get criticized. And it's like, if you had any idea what a day in my life was like, you wouldn't criticize me. You would give me a freaking medal, And I think having that compassion and saying, hey, are you okay? Is there anything I can help you with? I can see you're struggling with such and such project. Is there anything I can do to support you with it? That kind of thing in the workplace or friends. And I think knowing, for example, what options are out there, like employee assistance programs, which are great for people who don't already have a therapist. If you already have a therapist, there's not really much those programs have to offer. And in addition, the licensing entities, like in my instance, the state bar, often have those kinds of employee assistance benefits as well. So being aware of what exists, and you asked having that conversation, the best way to have that conversation is to be able to say, hey, I just want to make sure there's this program in case you need anything. And this one drives me absolutely crazy. Let's just say there's been a celebrity who died by suicide. And then there'll be an article, and at the bottom, if you or anyone you know is having thoughts of suicide, contact whatever. When people are struggling with mental health, it's hard to reach out. And so having somebody to be able to say, hey, I can see you're having a hard time, and just showing that compassion I mean, that could be the highlight of someone's day. If your coworker is clearly struggling, even if you have no idea what's going on with them, just say, hey, I can see you're having a really hard time with this. I can see you're having a really tough day. Are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help? And even if they say no, you may have still just made their day. It's like somebody sees me. Being seen, it's like this transfer of energy in a way. It transfers the positive energy from one person to another person. And the person who's struggling gets this kind of hit of positive energy. And it makes it easier to help ourselves when it's like, oh, somebody sees me. I'm not alone. Yeah. And even if we say no, that doesn't mean it's not incredibly meaningful that you said something.
I think that's really important for me to know, and for others who maybe they do have a friend or a coworker where they sense something is off, but they're a little too timid to say something. That's very helpful.
Good,
now,
I'm glad.
I think we've come a long way in recognizing the importance of mental health, but I also think there is still so much to learn. I'm curious, what role do you think social media and the digital world has played in mental health? Has it helped or has it hurt?
Oh, I could spend an entire hour talking about that. That is a double-edged sword for sure. Because on the one hand, they talk about the detrimental effects, like unachievable beauty standards on Instagram, for example, that teen girls might see, and it might trigger eating disorders and things like that. So, I mean, there's a lot of that. There's a lot that says that either social media or too much time on social media is detrimental to our mental health. On the flip side, it's been great for promoting body positivity and mental health awareness on Facebook, for example. In addition to being in the City Girl group, I'm in several other groups, a lot of which have to do with mental health, and being able to share those experiences and that support and seeing, oh my gosh, it's not just me, can be really great. And even a lot of them, for example, I'm in an ADHD group that some people are diagnosed, some people aren't, but some people just recognize in themselves. So you may feel like, hey, I have this and I want to find some community around this and see, do I relate to what other people are experiencing? You can be in a group like that and see. Maybe you think you might have ADHD and then you go into this group and then it's like, oh, well, I don't struggle with those things. Something else is going on with me. So I think in that sense, social media can be incredibly helpful. But that said, I do think we have to make a conscious effort to, I'll use the Instagram example, but there's some that I've unfollowed where it's like, you know what? I just don't feel good when I see this person because it triggers some feeling in me that isn't healthy for me. Unfollow. So be really conscious. Or for example, our phones have different things that you can set time limits. And yes, you can unset them too, but at least it's a hurdle. At least it's this moment that makes you stop and think, okay, wait. Do I really want to keep being on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok? Whatever people are using these days that I'm too old to bother with. So anyway, I think it's really important to use it in a mindful way and be healthy about it.
Definitely. And I think pulling the thread through there, be honest with yourself, right? Don't go on Instagram saying, I'm just going for inspiration, but then you leave feeling crappy about yourself. Be honest, like, okay, this actually isn't doing what it's supposed to do. So I need to turn my social media off, just take a break, unfollow, mute, do what you have to do, but recognize that and be honest with yourself about what's really going on.
And tune into your intuition. What's my intuition saying? Is my intuition saying, ugh, now I feel bad about myself?
Yeah.
So much about mental health is listening to your intuition, your gut, whatever you want to call it.
I agree. And I think now that you've shared that and people hear that, what are maybe some immediate next steps a person could take to seek help or assistance?
Well, if someone is in crisis, I would say a few different things. So we'll kind of start from the most extreme crisis down. If you're in extreme crisis, life-threatening crisis, and you don't have somebody in your home with you, you may have to just reach out. You may need to take yourself to an emergency room, call a crisis line, whatever you need. I have found in the past helplines related, for example, to some of the trauma I've experienced. I was hesitant to call, but my gosh, I got so much, like you were talking about with employee assistance, I got so much compassion. They kind of talked me down from being worked up and nothing good was going to come of the state that I was in. again, if you don't already have a therapist, contacting employee assistants to get at least a few sessions. Ask around. If you have friends in therapy, ask if they know of any recommendations. Maybe even their therapist would give them a recommendation for you. I have done that for people, and my therapist has been helpful. And if you're comfortable with it, if it's not pushing your boundaries, then just say to someone, hey, I'm just really struggling right now. I'm not at my best. A safe person, someone who's not going to judge you and be like, well, what do you have to be depressed about or whatever? Those people are not your people when it comes to this stuff. You want the person who's going to say, I'm so sorry. Do you want to talk about it? That's the person to talk to. I think especially if people don't know about your struggles or aren't picking up on it, it kind of sucks, but we do have to say something, or joining a community online can be incredibly helpful as well.
Thank you for that. Mm-hmm. Lisa, is there anything else you'd like to share with someone who's struggling with mental health?
Yeah, it doesn't feel okay, but you will be okay. And there are people out there who love you, and there are people out there who are going through what you're going through. And I think the main thing is just to say, it's okay not to be okay.
Thank you so much for that, for having this conversation, for offering this conversation. I appreciate it so much. And I have no doubt that someone is listening to this and really feeling empowered and inspired to get help or talk to someone that they truly care about. So I appreciate this so much. Thank you so much, Lisa.
It was my pleasure. And I really do sincerely hope this is helpful to somebody.
Thank you so much for tuning into City Girl Savings today. I hope you feel empowered and inspired to master your money as you make your way to your dream life. Make sure you subscribe so you're the first to know when a new episode comes out. I truly value your thoughts and feedback, so please leave a review and let me know how this podcast has impacted you. Can't wait to chat soon and make it a great day.